Marvel's Midnight Suns is a very hard game to explain. One of the most annoying discussions a game critic can get stuck in is a discussion about genre. Genre is a useful tool for general categorization, a great way to organise an online marketplace. You can look at a modern Assassin's Creed and say, oh, it's an open-world RPG, and that sets accurate expectations for the game to come. But poking even a little bit into that, and you start to see some parts that don't fit. Stealth is an important part of the game, but not really expressed by open-world RPG. Or what about the parts where the game turns into a base-building game, or a rhythm game, or a naval battle simulator, or a business management sim? Genres start to become less valuable the closer you look at any game, and then, sometimes, just sometimes, a game doesn't even fit a genre broadly. Midnight Suns has RPG elements, it also has deck building, and squad-based tactics, and limited open-world exploration, and relationship management, and it's also a superhero game where Spider-Man can punch the Hulk. It is a true mutt of game design, hard to explain, impossible to market, and absolutely glorious in its creative freedom. If there's any game that deserves the term cult classic, it's Marvel's Midnight Suns. It's not a game that will be for everyone, any genre blend typically isn't, but if it works for you, you will never shut up about it again. Like me! I actually can't believe how long it's taken me to make a video about Midnight Suns, considering how much I love it. It's not only one of the best superhero games ever made, it's also one of the best tactical games ever made. I have never played any other game quite like it before or since, and I have a feeling it's going to stay that way for a long time. Uniqueness in game design is a fine line to walk. You need to be somewhat unique, you need a USP to stand out. But if you're too unique, then people won't know what to make of you and you'll most likely be avoided. Such was the fate of Midnight Suns. The marketing for the game was bad, sales were well under expectations, and the game remains pretty obscure even a few years later, with a lot of people not really understanding what the game actually is. There are a lot of Marvel games out there, mostly phone games of varying quality, from the big boys like Marvel Snap, to the whole bunch of games that you've probably never heard of, like Marvel Puzzle Quest, Marvel Future Fight, Marvel Contest of Champions, Marvel Future Revolution, Marvel Strike Force, Marvel Avengers Academy, Marvel Mighty Heroes, Marvel Mystic Mayhem, or Marvel Super War. Those are all real. Midnight Suns looks like it could be one of these games, a throwaway mobile title not really worth your time or my analysis. It certainly doesn't look like a AAA full 100-hour RPG. That is what it is though. Midnight Suns is the child of Firaxis Games, the studio most famous for making Civilization and the XCOM series. According to game director Joe Weinhoffer, Marvel Studios approached them and asked them to make a tactical game and gave them extreme creative freedom to go about that, with the only caveat being that they couldn't change any characters in a fundamental way. The result is masters of the tactical craft translating superheroes into the tactical genre in the most ingenious and superb ways that I couldn't even have possibly imagined. Because the game defies the constraints of its genre at every turn, it defies a lot of expectations. The XCOM series is sci-fi, it's all about shooting aliens, so are most of the Avengers movies. Midnight Suns swings completely the opposite direction, a supernatural threat of demons and vampires and occult priests. But we'll get to that. We'll get to all of that, because I cannot wait to tell you about Marvel's Midnight Suns.
I can feel it, Rox. Trouble in the air. More innocent blood joining you soon.
There is a prophecy, the prophecy of the Midnight Sun. The mother of demons shall arise and usher in the age of Chthon. But as with any doomsday prophecy, as darkness falls, a champion rises to face it. And as much as he'd like to pretend otherwise, that champion is not Tony Stark. One of the most bold creative choices that Midnight Suns makes is introducing its own brand new superhero to take on the protagonist's role, the Hunter, first child of Lilith and prophesied champion of the Midnight Sun. In a game with heavy hitters like Iron Man, Spider-Man and Wolverine, the idea of instead putting most of the narrative focus on a complete newbie might seem a little weird. But it's a choice that ends up working well for the story. After all, this isn't a comic book, this is an RPG. And an RPG requires a character who is slightly more versatile than strict character guidelines would allow. The Hunter is a lot like Commander Shepard from the Mass Effect series. They are fully customizable, including gender, but they also have a set role in the story, a solid backstory, and the option of 2 distinct interchangeable personalities, depending on whether you embrace the light side or the dark side in general conversations. What makes it work is how much of the game is actually centered on the hunter over the more famous characters. This is their story much more than it's an Avengers story. It's a fight against their mother. All the other characters are moving into their house. This fight against demons and prophecies makes much more sense for them than it does for Captain America. The hunter is portrayed as a woman in pretty much all of the game's marketing, including the cover of the game, and there are some elements of the story which feel a little more natural with a female hunter, but unlike some other games, this is not a hill that I'll die on. The hunter starts the game dead. They died 300 years ago fighting Lilith in Old Salem, Massachusetts. But part of the prophecy requires their resurrection, so Doctor Strange gets the ball rolling on that. This makes the hunter a good protagonist, especially if you're not familiar with some of the heroes that show up in the game. Hunter knows some stuff about witches and magic and demons, but nothing about any of the modern day heroes you meet as the game goes on. So these heroes, even the A-listers, are treated the same way as the companions in any RPG. They have to introduce and explain themselves without the assumption of knowledge. Of course, it's pretty much impossible these days that anyone playing the game isn't at least passingly familiar with the Avengers, and the story does play with those expectations in interesting ways, but it's much less likely that the player will be familiar with characters like Nico Minoru, Magic, or Robbie Reyes. Characters who have technically all appeared on screen, but never in the big blockbusters. The hunter is grounded in the world with their connections to other more established Marvel characters. Lilith is an old-school Marvel Comics villain, although the game gives her a significantly cooler design than her comics counterpart, and the hunter was raised by Agatha Harkness and Lilith's sister Sarah, the Caretaker, who's an amalgamation of two different characters from the Ghost Riders comics. Lilith, Sarah, and the hunter are the last descendants of the Blood, meaning the blood of the Elder Gods, which means they're immortal and able to harness the old magics. The home base of the game is the Abbey, which exists in a pocket dimension of Massachusetts. So the whole game is saturated in this old witchy vibe, which is a great change of pace from how Marvel is usually presented. Even the Doctor Strange movies are more rooted in sci-fi, with their explorations of parallel dimensions and trippy visuals, than they are in this old-school magic of potions, rituals, and sacrifices. Like almost any aesthetic they could have pegged, this is perfectly in keeping with Marvel Comics, which have explored pretty much every genre and aesthetic you could think of after 100 years of comics. But committing to this Halloween spooky atmosphere gives the game a completely distinct vibe, especially amongst other Marvel video games. It's the first of many expectations that the game subverts. The game has a tremendous sense of escalation across its long runtime. The game is split into 3 acts, and while the game is about an upcoming apocalypse, the first act doesn't tap into that apocalyptic vibe at all. Act 1 is for the most part very traditional Marvel stuff, battling Hydra goons across New York City. This time of typical Marvel stuff is useful for a few reasons. It sets up a status quo which can be shattered later, it lets the game play with the audience expectations of how a story like this is supposed to go, and it lets you figure out how exactly the combat system works with a bunch of vaguely fascist mooks before the threats really get serious. Apparently, in the very first drafts of the game when Marvel first approached them, Firaxis were going to make an Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. game, something that would be much closer to XCOM. But early in production, they decided that playing as the superheroes is much more interesting than playing as the guys who help the superheroes on the sidelines. This is the change that facilitated a complete reimagining of the tactical genre. Most tactical games rely on a sense of fragility and of risk and reward based gameplay. Your team needs to be properly organised, you need to be thinking multiple steps ahead, and if one member of your team gets caught out in the open, they're likely to get demolished quickly. But this kind of fragility is at odds with the superhero fantasy. It's pretty common in tactics games to tie your chances of hitting an enemy to a percentage based on various statistics like the level of the character, or their distance from the enemy, or the cover in the way, or whatever. But for Captain America to run up to a goon and miss his punch would be both out of character and extremely unsatisfying. So the whole thing is completely reimagined to focus on hero power over fragility. What's most misleading about Midnight Sun's combat system is that it's much simpler and much more intuitive than it initially appears. It's hard to explain and takes quite a few missions to properly tutorialise, because the whole thing is built around a series of completely interconnected systems that all play off of each other in compellingly complex ways. First is cards. Every action a hero takes is a card play. Cards which you build up, choose, and upgrade back at the home base. Every round of combat you get 3 card plays. The team knew from the beginning that cards would be a controversial choice, but cards were chosen because card games rely on definitive rules and set outcomes. You choose a card, and you know the outcome. Unlike a more traditional tactics game where you choose a card that is most optimal or most likely to do what you want. When you choose the punch card, you know that Captain America is going to land that punch come hell or high water. But a deck of cards is also randomised, meaning there's still an element of chance and therefore quick tactical thinking required. The second system is heroism. Some cards generate a secondary resource called heroism, and some more powerful cards require heroism to use. This allows for a feeling of genuine power to come through. These are superheroes with supernatural abilities, and this charging up mechanic communicates this superhuman escalation in a typical round of combat. The third system is movement. Each round you get one move to reposition a character anywhere you want on the battlefield. This is the system that really makes the whole thing click, because this is the mechanic that truly cements the game as a tactics game. Many cards in the game have a secondary knockback effect, which will allow you to knock enemies into walls, other enemies, or other heroes. But most knockback is limited to a 90-degree cone behind the enemy, which means making efficient use of this mechanic requires careful positioning. There's also environmental attacks on every mission, like boxes to throw, barrels to blow up, or crates to kick, that cost heroism to use and clever positioning to use properly, but don't cost a card to use. The trick of the entire system is efficiency. You only get 3 card plays per turn, but the whole combat system is about prolonging your turn as long as possible within these core systems. Some cards have a quick trait, which means if you KO an enemy, then the card play is refunded. Every mission in the game is peppered with minion enemies who don't have any health, so any damage will KO them instantly, and this creates an instantly understandable feedback loop. Minions can still do decent damage to you, so you can't ignore them, but their main role is as fodder, so you can charge up your more powerful attacks for the more powerful enemies. Every round of combat adds more reinforcements, so it's in your best interest to take down as many enemies as possible every round to avoid being overwhelmed. This means that aggression is not only rewarded, it's required. These systems allow you to start pulling off some incredible chains of action. You get an upgrade early on that allows you to use your movement to shove an enemy. This won't do any damage unless they hit something, but if used correctly, it's essentially free damage. A little later on, you get an upgrade that means that if an enemy is hit into another hero, then not only will it do extra damage, it will draw one of that hero's cards into your deck. Which, if you're running low on cards, is extremely useful in a pinch. Some cards apply a marked effect to enemies, which means that card plays are refunded on KO even if they're not quick, allowing you to really lay into an enemy with the power cards and still keep the fight going. In an ideal round, you're not taking any damage that you didn't expect and have a counter prepared for. On its own, this core loop is extremely satisfying. Knocking an enemy into an explosive barrel which takes out a few minions, which then refunds the attack and allowing you to finish off the big guy is supremely satisfying. But what escalates the whole system to the next level is how every character is designed to utilise a different part of this core loop, in ways which perfectly align with their traditional comic book abilities. Magic is a great example. Magic's main superpower is that she can open portals, so her strategy in combat is using portals to pinball enemies around with the knockback mechanic. Iron Man uses the redraw mechanic, which normally just lets you trade out cards in your hand for something else, to instead charge up his attacks and make them more powerful. This plays with the idea of his suit charging up, as it so often does in the movies, but also with the idea that he's kind of an attention hog, using up a valuable resource all to himself. Captain America is just a guy with a shield, but he is a very inspiring guy with a shield. His cards are all about drawing attention to himself, building up a layer of block above his health bar and taunting enemies, while also drawing more cards into your hand to facilitate other characters doing more powerful stuff. He's rarely the strongest piece on the board, but he is a leader that inspires others. It's tempting to go through every character in the game like this. All of them are tremendously designed and integrated into the system in ways that feel completely natural and in keeping with their character, while also making full use of a system that was entirely created for this game. It's incredible. Spider-Man is built around environmental attacks, throwing stuff around with his webs. Nico embraces randomness, with all of her cards having a roulette system which changes their effect every time they're drawn. Captain Marvel is Captain Marvel. She hits hard, and the more she hits, the harder she can hit, with her own personal charge-up mechanic that allows her to go binary after a few attacks, enhancing her abilities. But to compensate, most of her abilities incur a heavy heroism cost. The design is incredible and enhanced even further by the small details. The satisfying thunk when an enemy hits a wall, the heaviness of Ghost Rider swinging an enemy around with his chains. The game just has an extremely tactile feeling to it. The visuals of the game are nothing incredible, especially not for a game from 2022, but where the presentation matters, it always exceeds the mark. Even with the most simple objective of killing all the enemies, the combat is extremely fun, even in repetition because of all the different heroes to switch between. But the game also keeps it fresh with different objectives and surprise boss fights that keep switching things up and forcing you to keep thinking about the most efficient course of action in any given turn. The game has an adjustable difficulty that you can tune up or down between missions depending on if you're finding the game too hard or too easy, with increased rewards for higher difficulties. But the core name of the game is fun, much more than struggle. While the game is a deck builder of sorts, the deck is always stacked in your favour. There's not really any bad cards for any hero, and each hero only has about 10 cards to choose from total. So even if you're building decks for up to 17 different heroes, including the DLC, it never gets overly complicated because once you've figured out how a character works, you can quickly figure out how to build them in a way that complements their strengths. The only exception is the Hunter, who has a much broader range of cards to choose from than any other character. As the main character who appears in almost every mission, they're designed to be the most versatile and customizable to how exactly the player wants them to function. They can be a strong support character, a high-risk, high-damage assassin character, or a mix of both. Every card in the game can be upgraded to enhance its effects or give it new effects, which along with the many other upgrades you can unlock as the game goes along means that there's always an upward sense of progression. Every encounter makes you a little bit more powerful in clear and tangible ways. The whole system is incredibly fun, incredibly unique, and on its own excellent enough to carry the entire game. And it's only about half of what you actually do in Midnight Suns. Your team is split between two groups. On one side you have the Avengers, Iron Man, Doctor Strange, Captain Marvel, and Captain America, the tried and tested, well-established heroes. On the other side you have the Midnight Suns, Nico Minoru, Magic, Ghost Rider, and Blade, the lesser-known heroes, young and untested. Well, except for Blade, but he gels more with the Suns than he does with the Avengers. You also pick up a couple famous tag-alongs, Spider-Man and Wolverine, but the core of the team is split between these two different groups. And that's the basis that a lot of the game's drama is built around. While its influences are all over the place, when it comes to the dialogue, Midnight Suns very much takes its cues from the MCU. The game ranges from high melodrama to pure, grady cheddar cheese, particularly with the quippy characters like Stark, Strange, and Spidey.
Yeah, so speaking of Lilith...
Tony?
What? The kid's literally speaking of Lilith. Tony. That's my name.
Tony. That's Carol and Dr. Spooky over there. Here to help.
Help with what, exactly?
Oh, I don't know. Throwing the magic amulet into the volcano? Smiting the dragon mother? You tell us, kid. You are the chosen one, after all.
Besides the quippy dialogue, the other thing the game inherits from the MCU is its balance of action versus downtime. Over half the game is spent on things outside of the action. Every hero in the Abbey has a friendship meter that you increase with dialogue choices, compliments, and most importantly, hanging out with them and doing various activities around the Abbey, like watching a movie, lounging by the pool, stargazing, and so on. It presents a completely different kind of fantasy to combat. What if you could date the Avengers? It's a big swing for a game like this, and some of the conversations about how you're the bestest friend they've ever had can be a little grating. But for the most part, it does work. After all, what makes these characters compelling isn't really their superpowers, it's that they're interesting people, which makes getting to know each of them a real treat. There is an enormous amount of the game that is dedicated to this social aspect, pages and pages and pages of casual chatty dialogue, both with the Hunter and with each other as you overhear conversations around the Abbey. Several different clubs form which you can participate in, like a book club that Blade starts, or talking shop with the techie boys. The game goes to great lengths to explore these heroes as people much more than as heroes, and the result is sometimes grating, but mostly endearing. Some characters are easy to get along with, like Peter Parker or Steve Rogers. Some require patience, like Magic. Magic has had a very difficult life up to this point. She doesn't trust easily and she doesn't like attention. If you're too pushy in trying to be her friend, she'll back away. but if you take it slow, then she'll become one of the most loyal. The game is excellently cast, with a lot of veteran Marvel voice actors reprising their roles, like Steve Blum as Wolverine, Yuri Lowenthal as Spider-Man, and Lyrica Okano as Nico Minoru, reprising her role from the Runaways TV show. The Hunter is mostly a blank slate kind of character, although with enough of a defined personality not to be boring. The fact that they're 300 years out of date is often used for humour, like a very fun exchange with Robbie about video games, and the character is voiced in a very stilted, formal way suited to someone from the 1700s. One of my favourite Hunter moments happens very early on in an introductory conversation with Blade.
Is your name really Blade?
Is your name really the Hunter?
Yes?
Oh, really? Your mom, before she became the mother of demons, looked into your cradle and decided to name her firstborn child the Hunter.
That is how I understand it.
It takes all kinds.
Every character forms a different sort of relationship with the Hunter based on their own backstory and their own personality. With Blade, for example, it's a friendly rivalry between fellow monster hunters. Blade initially sees you as a threat because of your demon heritage, in the same way he sees himself as a threat because of his vampire heritage. But that becomes a key part of the bond between hunters. With Steve, it's more of a mentor-mentee relationship, as he takes you under his wing to give you some lessons about leadership. The opposite happens with Robbie, who takes on the mentee role under the Hunter as he struggles with his own confidence among heroes. With Nico and Magic, the dynamic is more that of sisterhood, or siblinghood I guess, found family bonding in the wake of tragic original families. With other characters like Carol, Logan, or Peter, the dynamic is mostly just friendship, but friendship is still a great way to get to know someone, even if, like Spider-Man, you probably already know all about them. There is a mechanical structure to these friendships. As your friendship level with a hero increases, they gain new passive abilities in combat, further enhancing them and moulding them even more to their specific playstyles. Like Iron Man getting extra redraws whenever he uses a card, or Captain America constantly generating block on himself every round. But moreover, getting to know these characters is important for the story, especially as they start fighting each other. When the apocalypse begins, the Avengers roll into the Abbey and immediately start taking charge. They set up all their equipment and make all their plans to save the world. That is, after all, what they do most days of the week. The game's characterization of Tony Stark is especially good in this regard. Just like the movies, he's a smart arse, he has a giant ego, he's extremely stubborn, and he thinks he knows better than anyone. The qualities that make him an interesting character also make him a very annoying co-worker. But the reality is, he's just the most open and obvious in his arrogance about the situation, and his assumption that the grown-ups know best. Strange and Carol share this dismissiveness towards the younger heroes, especially in the beginning. They don't notice what they're doing because they're just doing what they always do, being the big heroes. Even though, for this particular flavour of Apocalypse, they are not the experts. The Midnight Suns are, but they are young and unproven, so the Avengers assume that they don't have much to add. But the Avengers' plans keep going sideways because they're trying to fight against a prophecy. Prophecy is often an annoying story concept, but it works well within the game because the prophecy is explicitly a bad one. The prophecy says you lose, so no matter how many battles you win, you keep losing the war and seeing more and more of the prophecy come true. Strange loses the Sanctum Sanctorum to a venom corrupted by Lilith. A little later, Avengers Tower falls as well, leaving the Abbey as the only stronghold the Avengers have left. And as the Avengers lick their own wounds, resentment grows within the Suns. Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch, was kidnapped by Lilith when the Sanctum fell. She was a former Midnight Sun herself and Strange's apprentice. But in their eyes, the Avengers seem to care more about some old building than their friend. The game cleverly keeps Captain America out of the Abbey while this dynamic is being established, because obviously once he does show up, Steve isn't on board. But by then, it's too late, and the rivalry between the Suns and the Avengers is well underway. As the main character, you end up stuck in the middle. You can see the resentment festering, but you can also sympathise with the Avengers in a way that the Suns can't. They obviously mean well, they just can't seem to understand that this time, they're not the most important pieces on the board. Act 1 ends with the Sanctum being destroyed completely and opening a portal from which an army of demons starts invading the world. Not only that, it's revealed that Bruce Banner has fallen under Lilith's influence, making the Avengers, and especially Tony, even more invested in being the big heroes. Rather than feeling sympathy, this just makes the Suns even more annoyed, especially Nico and Magic. Oh, so now we should be worried, now that one of your friends has been taken? It's all just very well handled drama, where both positions are clear, perfectly understandable and sympathetic, but it's hardly a sustainable situation. If you need a break from all the drama, you can always go for a walk. Probably the most unnecessary inclusion in the game is the surprisingly large exploratory space surrounding the Abbey. There's no danger out there, just secrets and stories to uncover. Agatha Harkness died shortly before the game begins in a training accident with Wanda, but she's not going to let that stop her from being helpful. So her ghost acts as your tour guide as you uncover the history of the Abbey and the surrounding area. This whole section of the game is completely optional, but it gives you a deeper understanding of the story if you do it, and it's also a nice mix-up from the combat and the conversations. There's a bit of a Metroidvania system to it, where as you explore more, you unlock new exploratory powers that allow you to access more areas and uncover more secrets and collectibles, including a very cool set of Marvel-themed tarot cards. Each new ability is locked behind a Bloodgate combat challenge, which is soft-locked by player level, so that your exploration doesn't outpace the progress of the story. The history you learn moves between different eras, from the origins of the Abbey to the downfall of Lilith, to the Hunter's time training with Sarah and Agatha, to the recent history of Wanda's own explorations of the Abbey grounds before Sarah kicked her out. Sarah is an especially interesting character. She often comes across as a stuck-up old crone, constantly getting in the way of characters doing things. But where the younger sons read her behaviour as controlling and condescending, it actually comes from a place of deep guilt and overprotectiveness. The Hunter's relationship with Sarah is left up to the player to decide. She is a mother figure, but she also raised you to be a weapon, a decision which, with 300 years of hindsight, she has come to regret. She used to be a much worse, much harsher person than she is now. Descendants of the Blood are not supposed to fall in love or have children. Sarah was a firm believer in this. She resented her sister and her human husband for that, and that resentment is part of what led Lilith to fall to the dark side in the first place. It was only after all of that Sarah met Agatha, started to fall in love, started raising a child, and accidentally found herself in the exact same family position she had so harshly judged her sister for pursuing. Sarah is a deeply flawed person. She's trying to be better, but she just keeps on making more mistakes, like pushing Wanda away after the accident, like ignoring the struggles of the Midnight Suns and keeping secrets from them, and even keeping secrets from the Hunter, all in her attempts to keep them safe. A complete overcorrection from the ruthless person she used to be. It's up to you to decide how much sympathy you give to Sarah. It's implied in the Hunter's journals, which you can find, and in the fact that the Hunter never got a real name even in all the years they were raised by Sarah, that she was not exactly a nurturing, tender, parental figure, maybe even bordering on abusive depending on how harshly you want to read into things. Her attempts at redemption are sincere, her failures to actually do so are apparent. She means well, but she was never the empathetic one. That was Agatha's job. And as far as she knows, Agatha is gone now. More than anything else, it's this relationship with Sarah that really anchors the Hunter to the world and gives them the definition to stand alongside these more established heroes. The time exploring is sort of like the player's own personal hangout with the Hunter, getting to know more about them, getting to define more about them, as is the nature of RPGs. Plus, the Abbey grounds are just interesting to explore, full of strange, witchy sights and chests full of cosmetic items. You can easily spend a couple hours just wandering around out there, exploring and solving little traversal puzzles. Act 2 is when the apocalypse really kicks into high gear. The demon enemies are much tougher than the Hydra goons, almost all of them having some kind of unique quirk that you need to learn how to deal with. Like these guys who split into two whenever they take damage, or these soul-bound ladies who have to be taken out simultaneously. Or the absolutely enormous dread maidens that will often show up with the intention of ruining your day. The action moves from the city to the American Southwest in pursuit of Johnny Blaze, because he has the last page of the Darkhold, Marvel's own Necronomicon. This whole middle chapter of the game is essentially a series of escalating failures. It doesn't quite feel that way because you always win your battles, but it's becoming increasingly clear how unprepared you really are to deal with a threat of this scale. Johnny Blaze can tell you're not prepared and so absolutely refuses to help you, because he's an asshole. Act 2 is where the Midnight Suns really start to come to the forefront of the story. Nico and Magic start going rogue in their attempts to rescue and uncorrupt Wanda, and Robbie comes much more into the spotlight after avoiding it entirely for all of Act 1. Robbie views Johnny Blaze with admiration as a fellow Ghost Rider, the only person in the whole Abbey who doesn't immediately get sick of his bullshit. And when Johnny forcefully transfers the Darkhold page to him, Robbie goes from least important person in the Abbey to most important immediately. This focus on Robbie is reflective of how most of the main story is structured. It's a pass-the-baton situation where different heroes take the focus for different parts of the story, making sure that by the end, nobody feels neglected. For instance, Robbie's story intersects with Magic's story when Johnny tries to sell out the Hunter to Mephisto, voiced incredibly by Jason Isaacs. But Mephisto is Magic's villain, and she has some choice words when she discovers him back in Limbo after she kicked him out the first time. A little later during Act 3, the story pivots to Captain America for a while when his old rival and recurring mini-boss Crossbones tips him off to some old Hydra bases full of secrets that may just help them win this war. Blade does get a few story missions to himself, but the bulk of Blade content is actually reserved for the DLC, which is also excellent, and does way more than it really needed to. The DLC adds 4 new heroes to your roster, which is more than enough to sell the DLC, but it also adds a whole new subplot, including an entirely new faction of enemies that start to populate the general missions. Vampires. Most of the DLC storyline can't actually be done until Act 2, and that's where it fits best narratively as well. While Lilith is unleashing her demon apocalypse, Dracula, king of the vampires, is cooking up his own schemes, which the new DLC characters find themselves wrapped up in. The first of the DLC characters is also the least of them. It's Deadpool. Deadpool has some good jokes, yes, some bad ones too. Mostly the problem is that he's the least mechanically interesting hero in the game, and I've never really figured out how to make him fun to play. It's hard to say he's completely atonal to the game, since the game can get pretty silly sometimes, but Deadpool has a very particular flavour of comedy which you have to be in the right mood for. Much more interesting is Venom, because Venom is also in the main game as one of Lilith's chosen and a recurring boss fight. The reason you can't do most of the DLC until Act 2 is because that's when Venom is defeated in the main story, and can then be redeemed for his DLC appearances. Eddie Brock is not a great guy, but he's not wholly evil either, and being forced to be completely evil for a while really messed him up. He wants a second chance, and if you give him one, he can be a true friend, albeit a slimy one. The third DLC character is Dr. Michael Morbius, no doubt trying to cash in on the smash box office sensation of the same year.
What is your catchphrase? It is time to morb?
Close enough. Let's do this.
But, more than the memes, the game succeeds at the impossible and actually makes Morbius an interesting character. He has a sarcastic dry wit and an unquenchable thirst for blood that, for now at least, he's trying to suppress. He doesn't really do friends, so the dialogue about how you're the bestest, most precious friend ever rings a little more true with Dr. Morb than it does with some of the other characters. The final DLC character is definitely the best mechanically because it's Storm. Her deal in battle is that the longer cards are in your hand, the more powerful they get, which can lead to some absolutely devastating strikes, which feel very in keeping with Storm, patient and powerful. She's also the least dramatic of the DLC characters though. She doesn't really have an arc to go on like the others, and instead she takes on another mentor Captain America-like role, teaching the Hunter about heroism and the burdens of leadership. Storm is also where the DLC's integration into the main story is at its most fragile. For the other characters, staying out of the Abbey drama makes sense, they're all socially awkward loners. Storm, though, is absolutely a team player, so the fact that she doesn't get more involved in trying to sort the team out feels a little strange. But that's probably asking for too much. The DLC characters are, for the most part, integrated into the main story about as well as you could expect. They're always standing alongside everyone else at the big moments, and often chime in with their own thoughts as the plot progresses. Like Morbius finding some sympathy for Bruce Banner and his inner demon, or Eddie wanting to help Wanda when you eventually rescue her as they've both been under Lilith's spell. Lilith. Why did I pick a third franchise with a major character called Lilith? Why am I doing this to myself? Once you've completed all of the individual DLC storylines, a final mission opens up to enter Castle Dracula and put the old count down for good. Seizing Castle Dracula with a collection of anti-heroes, and Storm, is just an all-time classic comic book moment. It's a very weird team to bring together, 2 Spider-Man villains, a goddess, Deadpool and Blade. But it just seems to work anyway, since the game took the time to build up all of these characters and their motivations independently before smashing them all together like this. The vampire faction is very fun to fight. They're not quite as challenging as the demons, but they're a swarm faction. Lots and lots of small enemies that can get tougher if you leave them hanging around for too long. I think I'm just impressed because absolutely none of this was necessary for the DLC. It's hardly the selling point of the DLC, and considering the game's less than stellar sales, it's kind of crazy that the game got its DLC at all, let alone that it's of a quality equal to the base game. It showcases the potential of these core systems, and what a waste it would be if we never got another game like it. Back in the main game, while demon-possessed Scarlet Witch is pretty typical as far as villains go, demon-possessed Bruce Banner is great fun, especially with how the game prioritizes the danger of Bruce Banner over the danger of the Hulk. Part of Lilith's corruption is preying on someone's pain and insecurities. For Wanda, it's the resentment she feels over being abandoned by a caretaker, and for Bruce, it's the feeling of inadequacy he feels about his own usefulness versus the Hulk. He does of course become the Hulk eventually, at the end of Act 2, but for all of Act 2, regular old super scientist Bruce Banner is the villain, using his intellect to hurt the heroes in ways that smashing them never could. It's another area where Tony really comes into focus because he takes this very, very personally, and his motivation becomes as much about proving he's smarter than Bruce than it does about actually saving the world, wrapping his ego up in the whole thing as he so often does. It's Tony's plan that ends up reviving the Hulk, this time with all the faculties of mad scientist Bruce Banner intact, the sleeping titan awoken just as the prophecy foretold. This is the low point of the story, but also the start of its highest points. It's the end of the world, but also the team finally getting their shit together as the third act moves to the fictional European country of Transia. Tony finally relents and stops trying to be the main character, accepting his support role with grace. The Midnight Suns step up and take charge without needing or expecting to be asked. And in a very touching moment, the gang all works together to tether Agatha more concretely to the world, allowing her and Sarah to reunite. While it's all over the game's marketing, the Midnight Suns armour for each character is saved for the very end of the game. You get a brief preview when you get to the final mission, but to unlock it completely, along with a super powerful endgame ability, you need to get a hero to the max friendship level and then complete an extra challenge for that hero. The challenges are puzzles, not combat, where you need an exact sequence of maneuvers to complete them and have to demonstrate a thorough understanding of how the character works. But the result is a hell of a reward. The Midnight Sun cards are easily the coolest moves in the game, and for the most part the Midnight Sun costumes are pretty cool too. Although some characters rock the colours better than others, Captain America looks a little out of place without his red, white and blue. They represent the perfect fusion between the two groups, high-tech armour infused with runes and magic. To actually unlock the armour and abilities for everyone to max out everyone's friendship level is a hell of a grind. It's not really meant to be done on a single playthrough. Your friendship levels and most of your progression carries over into New Game Plus, and this is clearly an exercise for multiple playthroughs. I did the grind anyway. It was probably not a smart use of my time, it definitely delayed the creation of this video, but I was enjoying myself too much to just wrap up the game. That core loop of combat really is engaging, even in extreme repetition, and getting to know all of these characters is one of the main features of the game. Each friendship is its own miniature story. Tony secretly asks for your help understanding more about magic. Strange confides in you his feelings of inadequacy and fear now that the Sanctum is gone and his connection to magic severely weakened. Your confidence in Wanda helps her regain her own confidence, and in doing so, her control over her abilities is strengthened as well. The very last character to get added to your roster is Bruce Banner. You manage to break the spell on him in the penultimate mission of the game. Because he's introduced so late, he doesn't get a friendship level and hangouts like everyone else, and the Hulk is mostly a toy left to be played with for New Game Plus. Which is a shame, but understandable because ultimately Banner's role in the story is more as a villain than as a friend. Before the finale, all of the characters gather around to say their farewells in a very classic BioWare sort of moment. But just like in a BioWare RPG, the moment lands, it works. It's been a long road. You've gotten to know these characters in a deeper, more intimate way than any movie, show, or even comic book would ever have time for. Except the Hulk, he doesn't care for these chats and just wants to smash, which is fair enough. The climax, though, is all about the twists. Bruce reveals to you when you do bring him back that Lilith has known a way into the Abbey the whole time. She could have invaded whenever she wanted, but she didn't want to. She doesn't want to win. Lilith also appears in Hunter's dreams throughout the game, not as the demoness she is now, but as the woman she used to be, centuries ago. She continues to claim that everything she's done, all the pain she's caused, it's all for the Hunter's benefit. She loves her child, she loves them more than the world itself, and she will stop at nothing until they are united again. In the early game, this reads as nothing more than villainous delusion, but as you learn more about Lilith, the words start to ring more true. The final revelation of the Abbey exploration is that Lilith's corruption and her fall to the dark side were self-inflicted. She did it to save the Hunter. A plague was sweeping the area, a plague not just of body, but of spirit. It killed her husband, and it would have killed her child too had she not made a pact with Chthon. Her life for her child's. When Sarah saw what her sister had become, she felt she could no longer trust her and cast her out, which, more than the pact, is what turned her so spiteful and vengeful. It's Sarah's deepest regret. It's why she buried the truth in the Abbey grounds in the hope she would never discover it. Is she entirely to blame for everything? No, but she certainly bears some share of the blame and the guilt anyway. After this revelation, your dialogue towards Lilith can soften. It doesn't have to, you can condemn her anyway for the suffering she's caused, but there is humanity left in her, and the Hunter is the only person who could possibly reach it. Just like you do for Wanda or Bruce. That wasn't Lilith's corruptive influence, it was Chthon's, and it hangs over Lilith just as it did for them, preying on her own pain and weaknesses. In the finale, Lilith isn't the final boss fight. She reveals that she's not trying to summon Chthon, she's trying to kill him. But just as you were doomed by prophecy to keep losing, she was doomed by prophecy to keep winning. And her last, near-fatal mistake comes when she shatters the Hunter's collar. Throughout the whole game, the Hunter wears a magical collar designed by Sarah and Agatha to contain their power and channel it efficiently. In mechanical terms, this means various passive abilities unlock depending on your balance of light and dark. Lilith assumes that this is a shackle, that destroying it will free the Hunter from the control of her sister who she hates so much. But in this particular instance, Sarah was correct. Shattering the collar removes the protection it was providing from Chthon's influence, and in the first stage of the finale, you have to fight yourself. The climactic mission tracks your friendship scores with all the heroes and locks away the heroes you're closest with for this stage, leaving it to everyone else to beat you back into your senses, which then swaps to getting the help of your closest friends for the final fight to seal away Chthon for good. It's a neat idea, but if I'm honest, I would have preferred something a little more scripted. While this is supposed to make the climax feel more personal, the fact that it's so interchangeable means that none of the other heroes could speak up during this climax. It's all Lilith, Hunter, and Sarah from here until the end. That's where the heart of the story lies, but it just feels a little weird that all of these chatty characters suddenly shut up for the last hour of the game. Obviously you win in the end, but that victory comes at a cost. Lilith and the Hunter both live by Chthon's will, and so when he's sealed away, they go with him. Together at last, but torn away from all the friends you've made. As with many RPGs, the Hunter's own personal character arc is something you can guide for yourself, but for me, someone who generally favours light side choices, this is quite a tragic ending. The first time they fought Lilith, the Hunter was fully prepared to die. They had spent their whole life training for that moment and expecting it to happen. This time, the Hunter is much less nihilistic about their fate. They've made friends, they've made much deeper connections with this generation of Midnight Suns than they ever had with the original team. They found reasons to live that they never really had before. In your last conversation with Agatha, you can express that fear, that hesitation in the face of nihilistic certainty. This ending was always predetermined. From the moment Lilith used that dark magic to save the Hunter, this was their fate. And the Hunter meets that moment with a melancholy resolve. But this time, they're not dead, and they have a hell of a lot of powerful friends looking for a way to bring them back. The game does lay out a few sequel teases, with the magicians of the team working together to find that loophole for you, and more importantly, with a final shot of a familiar-looking cloaked figure picking up the Darkhold from where it was left at the end of the world. But sequel teases are always bittersweet in a story that is unlikely to ever get one. Midnight Suns is an unfortunate reminder that being good is not the only requirement for success. The reasons that Midnight Suns flopped are clear and apparent, and none of them have to do with the actual quality of the game itself. It released at a bad time, it followed in the wake of an absolute train wreck of a Marvel game. It was extremely hard to market effectively because the mechanics make it look like a game that it isn't. Marvel fatigue, or whatever, I guess. Because of all of these factors, I have yet to be able to convince anyone to actually play this game. Maybe I've not been able to convince you either, maybe you've already decided the game's not for you, and that's fair enough. But I hope you've been able to understand at least why it's one of my all-time favourites, and why, even after making this video, I'll never be able to shut up about it.
Sometimes I forget just how beautiful that can be.
I never do.
Just wish everyone was here to see it.
Well, a giant wall of light did just teleport us back here from the crossroads of creation to our own little pocket dimension localized here in the sunny suburbs of Massachusetts. Fairly certain anything's possible at this point.
Thank you for watching, and a very special thank you to my wonderful patrons for your continued support. If you'd like to see your name up here, or just support the things that I do, then please consider signing up. It would mean a lot to me. As well as a like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring the bell. For another Marvel game-related video, you can click up here for a video analysing the character designs of Marvel rivals, or for something completely different, here's a video about Saudi Arabia. It's creeping up on 1,000 views, and it would be pretty cool if you were one of them.